April 20, 1944. A cold rain drifted across the English countryside. Wind rippled through endless rows of camouflage netting, concealing what, at first glance, looked like an entire armored division. Beneath the shroud stood hulking Sherman tanks, half-tracks, and artillery guns. The smell of oil and damp canvas hung in the air. A mechanic in muddy boots struck a match, shielding the flame with his hands as he lit a cigarette, exhaling into the gray morning. But if you'd walked closer, if you'd reached out and pressed your hand against one of those tanks, you wouldn't have felt cold steel. You'd have felt fabric. The massive army sprawling across the fields of southeastern England wasn't real. It was air, rubber, and imagination, an elaborate illusion designed to fool the most paranoid man in Europe, Adolf Hitler. The deception had a name, Operation Fortitude. And before D-Day, before the storming of Normandy's beaches, it would become one of the most audacious lies ever told in modern warfare. In a dimly lit operations room at St. James's Square, London, British intelligence officers crowded around a large wall map of Western Europe. Red and blue pins marked every major port, every known German division. The tension was thick. The Allied invasion of France, the single largest amphibious assault in history, was weeks away. And yet, if the Germans guessed where the landings would happen, the entire operation could be annihilated before the first soldier even reached the shore. Colonel John Bevan, head of the London Controlling Section, the nerve center of Allied deception planning, leaned over the table. His voice was calm but firm. "If we can make them believe the attack is coming at Pas-de-Calais," he said, "we buy the real invasion the time it needs to survive." The room fell silent for a moment. Everyone knew what that meant. Normandy, the true target, would face the full wrath of the Wehrmacht unless Hitler's eyes were fixed elsewhere. To do that, they would need to conjure up an entire phantom army. Fortitude was not just one plan, it was two. Fortitude North would convince the Germans that the Allies planned to invade Norway. Fortitude South, the crown jewel, would fabricate an entirely fictional invasion force aimed at the Pas-de-Calais, the shortest distance between Britain and France, and the most logical target in German eyes. The Allies knew Hitler's thinking. Pas-de-Calais was heavily fortified, close to German supply lines, and easy to defend. Every German officer from Rommel to Rundstedt believed it was the inevitable landing point. Fortitude's task was to make that belief absolute. And so, in the spring of 1944, a shadow army began to take shape. In the quiet town of Dover, along England's southeastern coast, British engineers worked day and night under tight secrecy. Using inflated rubber molds, they crafted full-sized tanks, trucks, and artillery, hundreds of them, each designed to deceive reconnaissance aircraft flying high above the channel. To the Luftwaffe's cameras, they looked like the staging ground of a massive invasion force. Nearby airfields buzzed with fake activity. Planes, painted wooden shells perched on crude frames, were wheeled into position. Dummy landing craft floated in marshes. Soldiers marched in and out of camps, waving at passing cameras, unaware that many of the men next to them were little more than dummies in uniform. But fake tanks and tents alone wouldn't fool Hitler's intelligence apparatus. The Germans were listening, constantly, to Allied radio traffic. So British operators created an entire orchestra of lies across the airwaves. At secret listening posts, hundreds of radio specialists crafted fake chatter, units calling in fuel reports, supply shortages, weather updates, convoy schedules. Every message was carefully timed and coded to mimic the rhythms of a real army. Operators adopted call signs and voices, maintaining the illusion for weeks. By late May, the Germans had identified a new threat on their intelligence maps, the 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, stationed under the command of one of America's most charismatic generals, George S. Patton. Patton was a perfect choice for the role of Phantom Commander. After slapping a soldier in Sicily, he had been sidelined, his aggressive reputation now ripe for exploitation. To German spies, he was the ultimate warrior, the man who would surely lead the decisive blow into occupied France. And so the myth grew. Reconnaissance photos confirmed the build-up. Intercepted orders pointed toward Calais. And the Germans, who trusted their own preconceptions more than their evidence, took the bait. But perhaps Fortitude's most dangerous weapon wasn't a tank or a radio. It was a human being. Across Britain, double agents, men and women who had once worked for the WWII, fed carefully scripted lies back to their former masters in Berlin. Chief among them was a Spaniard named Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo. Garbo was a master manipulator. Over the course of the war, he fabricated an entire network of imaginary spies, each with their own personality, handwriting, and reports. Berlin trusted him implicitly, believing he commanded a vast network of informants across England. In truth, every message he sent was reviewed by British intelligence. Garbo's role in Fortitude was to convince German high command that Fusag, the Ghost Army, was real, powerful, and preparing to strike the Pas-de-Calais any day now. His reports were so convincing that Hitler himself read them. And he believed every word. By early June 1944, everything was set. Thousands of Allied ships had quietly gathered on England's southern coast, ready to embark for Normandy. But to the Germans, listening through their spies and radio intercepts, the picture was completely different. In their eyes, the force at Dover, Patton's Phantom Army, was still preparing for the real invasion. Normandy, they believed, was merely a diversion. As storm clouds gathered over the Channel, Hitler's high command remained blind to the truth. The lie had worked. June 5, 1944. 2,300 hours. South coast of England. The rain had stopped, but the wind still cut cold across the decks of thousands of landing ships now swaying in the darkness. The sea, black and restless, stretched endlessly toward France. Across every vessel, soldiers huddled in silence, checking gear, whispering prayers, or staring at photographs tucked into breast pockets. Above them, the engines of C-47 transport aircraft thrummed like distant thunder. Pilots stared through thin layers of fog, their eyes fixed on compass bearings. Inside the cargo bays, paratroopers sat shoulder to shoulder, the smell of canvas, sweat, and fear heavy in the air. And yet, only a fraction of the German army waited for them on the far shore. Because somewhere in Berlin, Hitler's generals were convinced that this, whatever was happening in Normandy, was a feint. The true invasion, they believed, would strike later at the Pas-de-Calais, led by Patton's formidable 1st U.S. Army Group. That belief, born from fake radio chatter, rubber tanks, and double agents, would shape the next 48 hours of history. In Berlin's Wolfschanz, the Wolf's Lair, Adolf Hitler was awakened at dawn by his adjutant. Mein Führer, the invasion has begun. Hitler sat up, stunned. Where? Normandy, sir. Reports indicate landings along the beaches near Cannes and Bayeux. The room went cold. For a brief moment, Hitler considered the possibility that this was it, the long-feared Allied assault on Fortress Europe. But then his doubt returned, fed by months of misinformation. He turned to his staff. No. This cannot be the main attack. It's a diversion. Keitel nodded. Yes, my Führer. The main thrust will come at Calais. Hitler leaned back in his chair, calm once more. Then we wait. When the real invasion begins, we'll crush them there. On the Channel coast, German Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of all forces in the West, was furious. Reports flooded in from Normandy, paratroopers behind lines, artillery exchanges, and entire divisions mobilizing. He demanded reinforcements. But his superior, Field Marshal Rommel, was nowhere to be found. Rommel had returned to Germany for his wife's birthday, convinced that bad weather would delay the invasion until mid-June. Now, as Allied ships shelled the beaches, the most critical decisions in the German defense fell to men paralyzed by deception. At Dover, meanwhile, British engineers maintained the illusion. Even as the real invasion raged across the Channel, Fortitude's ghost army continued to breathe life into the lie. Radio operators transmitted constant updates from Patton's non-existent headquarters, orders for rations, munitions, and fuel deliveries to fusag units preparing to cross toward Calais. Dummy landing craft were still visible from the air, moored neatly in harbors that, to any observer, looked ready for departure. Every movement, every report, every sound was choreographed. And from his safe house in London, Garbo, the double agent, sent an urgent coded message to Berlin. My sources confirm, a second invasion force, much larger than the one in Normandy, is preparing to strike at Pas-de-Calais within the next few days. The WWII intercepted the message. It went straight to the top. Berlin believed it. June 6, 1944. 6:30 hours. The first wave of Allied troops stormed ashore at Normandy. The sea turned red. Machine gun fire tore through the mist. American soldiers clung to hedgehogs and shattered landing craft, their helmets ringing from shrapnel. The air reeked of cordite and salt. Back in Paris, the German 75th Corps reported the landings but received no permission to mobilize the 15th Army, the powerful force stationed at Calais. For 2 critical days, Hitler refused to release them. He was certain the main invasion was still coming. Those 2 days would decide the fate of Europe. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park monitored German communications with tense anticipation. When decrypted Enigma messages confirmed that the 15th Army remained in place, idle, watching the skies over Calais, they realized Fortitude had succeeded beyond expectation. Colonel Bevan, exhausted but grinning, reportedly said only one thing to his staff. "We've done it. The Germans are fighting shadows." Meanwhile, in the real world of blood and mud on Normandy's beaches, those extra days meant survival. By the time Hitler finally ordered his reserves to move, the Allies had already established beachheads, captured ports, and linked divisions inland. But still, the deception continued. Garbo sent more reports. Fortitude's operators maintained their fake radio networks. Patton, in full uniform, posed for carefully staged photographs in Kent, knowing they'd be spotted by German reconnaissance. To the WWII, his presence was undeniable proof, the attack at Normandy was still just a diversion. And so, even as the Allies fought their way toward Caen, German panzer divisions sat motionless, guarding an empty coastline at Calais. By July, the Allies had broken through at Saint-Lô and advanced toward Paris. The dream of Fortress Europe was collapsing. Yet in Hitler's headquarters, Fortitude's spell lingered. He still believed a second invasion was imminent. By the time the truth dawned, it was far too late. Operation Fortitude had bought the Allies 6 vital weeks, time to secure Normandy, advance inland, and turn the tide of the war. When the deception was finally revealed after the war, even German generals admitted they'd been thoroughly outplayed. One WWII officer famously said, "They didn't just deceive us. They made us deceive ourselves." The ghost army of Fortitude had vanished into history, its tanks deflated, its radios silent. But its legacy remained, a triumph of imagination over brute force, proof that in war, the sharpest weapon isn't always a gun. It's a good story. The kind of story that makes you wonder how many other ghosts shaped the course of history, unseen. March 1943. London, England. A light drizzle streaked the windows of the old brick building on St. James's Square. Inside, cigarette smoke curled toward the ceiling as officers crowded around a long oak table. The mood was tense, analytical, clinical, yet beneath it all was a quiet excitement. At the head sat Colonel John Bevan, the unflappable director of the London Controlling Section, a secret body so obscure that most Allied officers had never even heard of it. His mission, to orchestrate deception operations across Europe and beyond. The war had reached a turning point. With the Allies planning to return to the continent, Bevan's team faced a near-impossible task, not just to keep Hitler guessing, but to make him believe something entirely false, deeply, unshakably, fatally false. On the wall behind him, a map of Europe was covered in colored pins and strings. Blue for Allied forces, red for German divisions, green for intelligence sources. The channel looked almost alive with thread work. "Gentlemen," Bevan said, tapping the map near Pas-de-Calais, "we need them to look here, while we strike here." He dragged his pointer southwest toward the Normandy coastline. "That's the trick." Operation Fortitude wasn't just a plan, it was a theater production on a continental scale. Its success required a perfect blend of artistry and espionage, part stagecraft, part psychological warfare. For that, Bevan turned to one of Britain's most eccentric minds, Brigadier Dudley Clarke. Clarke had already masterminded Operation Abeam in North Africa, convincing Rommel that a non-existent British paratrooper division was stationed near Cairo by scattering dummy parachutes across the desert. His methods were unorthodox, but devastatingly effective. He arrived at Bevan's office with a grin and a simple proposition. "If you want to deceive the Germans," Clarke said, "you must think like a dramatist, not a soldier." The deception, he explained, would need actors, props, and an audience. The actors were the Allied intelligence officers and double agents. The props were fake tanks, landing craft, and airfields. And the audience, Hitler and the German High Command, would never see the stage directly. They would only glimpse it through intercepted messages, reconnaissance photos, and the whispers of their own spies. "Make the audience believe," Clarke said, "and they'll write the rest of the story themselves." To achieve that illusion, the British formed the 20 Committee, so named because XX in Roman numerals symbolized double cross. This committee managed all captured German agents in Britain, turning them into double agents who would now serve the Allies. At its heart was the Spaniard Juan Pujol Garcia, known to the British as Garbo and to the Germans as Arabelle. Garbo's brilliance lay in his ability to invent lives, 30 fictional agents scattered across England, each with unique backgrounds and coded signatures. He sent Berlin everything from fake convoy movements to morale reports from disgruntled factory workers. Every word was fabricated under MI5 supervision. And yet, by 1944, German intelligence trusted Garbo more than almost anyone else in Europe. He was even awarded the Iron Cross, by Hitler himself. Parallel to Garbo's web of lies, British radio specialists crafted Operation Quicksilver, the backbone of Fortitude South. Working from hidden transmitters, they simulated the vast communication traffic of an entire army. Dozens of operators played the roles of different units, complete with jargon and bureaucratic chatter. One night, a radio operator named Corporal Alfred Price recalled receiving a strange order. "Transmit fuel requests for the 2nd Armored Division, 36,000 gallons." Price frowned. There was no 2nd Armored Division in his sector. "Sir, where are they based?" he asked. "Nowhere," came the reply. "They don't exist." And so, night after night, Price sent messages into the ether for troops who weren't real, feeding an illusion that became stronger with every transmission. German listening stations near Antwerp picked up the chatter. Their analysts logged the call signs, compared the frequencies, and confirmed the existence of what they believed was the first U.S. Army group. Hitler's intelligence summaries soon listed Fusag as a 150,000-man force under the command of General Patton, equipped with armored divisions, air groups, and logistic support across southeast England. To the Abwehr, it was indisputable. Meanwhile, on the ground, the Royal Engineers and U.S. Signal Corps got to work turning farmland into what looked like military staging areas. They built dummy camps with tents, kitchens, and even fake laundry lines. Trucks drove in circles to create tire marks visible from aerial reconnaissance. Inflatable tanks were positioned under camouflage nets with just enough slack to make them appear heavy. Sound crews from Pinewood Studios, the same team that worked on British films, recorded and played back the noises of tanks, vehicles, and marching soldiers using massive field speakers. To any spy with binoculars, or a Luftwaffe pilot high above, it all looked perfectly authentic. But deception of this scale couldn't rely on fakery alone. It needed plausibility. That's where Patton came in. Charismatic, aggressive, and famously unpredictable, General George S. Patton was both a genius commander and a walking lightning rod. After being relieved of his command for striking a soldier in Sicily, he was kept out of public combat, but to German eyes, that only made him more dangerous. They saw him as the Allies' best field commander, the only man bold enough to lead an assault across the Channel. So, when British and American intelligence deliberately leaked hints that Patton was stationed in Kent, inspecting troops and giving fiery speeches, the Germans took note. Reconnaissance photographs of Patton's visits were accidentally visible to neutral Swedish journalists, whose reports inevitably reached Berlin. To the WWII, it was proof. To Fortitude's planners, it was perfect theater. By May 1944, the groundwork was complete. The Germans were watching the skies over Calais, listening to fake radio chatter, and tracking phantom divisions on maps. All that remained was to keep the illusion alive long enough for D-Day to succeed. And in the shadows of 1,000 secret rooms, men like Bevan, Clark, and Garbo waited, watching as their lies turned into the Allies' greatest weapon. They had built a ghost army. Now, they would set it loose. May 25, 1944. Dover, England. A low fog rolled off the English Channel, veiling the coastline in a grey shroud. The rhythmic thump of engines echoed through the mist, diesel trucks moving along the cliffside roads, headlights blacked out, hauling crates stamped with American insignia. To any observer, it was clear, an army was massing. Only, it wasn't. The convoy was empty. The crates were filled with sand. The tanks they parked at dawn were made of rubber and air. From above, Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft captured the scene in crisp black and white photographs. Dozens of landing craft lined the harbors, vehicles packed along the roads, and tents stretching for miles across the fields of Kent. When those photographs reached Berlin, the analysts nodded in satisfaction. Patton's army, one of them said. They're ready. They had no idea they were looking at the most elaborate stage set ever built. Behind the illusion stood men like Colonel David Strangeways, commander of the 21st Army Group's Deception Unit, and Major Jasper Maskelyne, a professional magician turned camouflage expert. Maskelyne had spent the early years of the war perfecting visual tricks, creating fake tanks, dummy airfields, and even entire decoy harbors. Now his skills were turned toward fortitude. Using lightweight canvas, rubber, and wood, his team assembled thousands of dummy vehicles designed to deceive both the naked eye and aerial cameras. Each tank was carefully detailed, complete with painted shadows, tar-stained engine decks, and faint markings suggesting recent use. At a distance of a few hundred feet, even a trained observer would have sworn they were genuine. But it wasn't just about what the Germans saw. It was about what they heard. At night, massive loudspeakers, borrowed from British film studios, played recordings of soldiers marching, engines idling, and heavy vehicles clanking over steel tracks. Operators varied the volume and tempo to mimic a living, breathing army preparing for invasion. Every sound, every flicker of light, was timed to match the story the Allies wanted Hitler to believe. Meanwhile, radio deception reached its peak. The Special Communications Units manned transmitters day and night, filling the airwaves with believable but meaningless chatter. Convoy Alpha, report supply levels. Roger, 12 trucks delayed, awaiting clearance at Folkestone. Copy that, fuel trucks en route from Ramsgate. Each transmission was logged, repeated, and cross-referenced to create a consistent narrative. The Germans intercepted these signals and plotted them on maps, unknowingly sketching out the outline of a completely fictional army. Berlin's analysts compared the reports from their spies, many of them secretly double agents like Garbo, and the picture seemed to fit perfectly. By early June, the WWII's intelligence summaries described Fusag as ready for imminent assault on the Pas-de-Calais sector. To German intelligence, Normandy was barely a footnote. Across the Channel, however, the real invasion force gathered in silence. Hundreds of thousands of men, American, British, Canadian, and Free French, waited under the cover of strict secrecy. Ports along the southern coast were locked down. No mail. No leave. And yet, to maintain Fortitude's credibility, the Allies still needed visible signs of military life along the eastern coast. To that end, Operation Glimmer and Operation Taxable were prepared, two naval deception missions designed to fool German radar on the night before D-Day. Small ships equipped with radar reflectors and chaff, thin strips of aluminum foil, would simulate a massive fleet approaching the Pas-de-Calais. Radar screens in France would light up like a Christmas tree, appearing to confirm what Hitler already believed. In essence, Fortitude was not a single lie, but a symphony of lies. Every branch of the Allied military, air, land, sea, and intelligence, played a part in the grand illusion. On June 2, Garbeau sent another coded message to his German handlers. The invasion will begin within the next week, but the principal attack will occur in the Pas-de-Calais area. Forces in the south are only diversions. The Abwehr decoded it immediately and forwarded it to Hitler's staff. The timing was perfect. As D-Day drew near, the dictator's conviction hardened. When the first reports of Allied landings reached his headquarters on June 6, he dismissed them as a distraction, just as Garbeau had predicted he would. In the hours leading up to the invasion, the full machinery of Fortitude came alive. At Dover, trucks drove through the night carrying nothing but air, circling back and forth to leave tire tracks that would be visible from reconnaissance planes. At Kent, dummy tanks were shifted slightly every few hours to mimic new deployment orders. At Allied headquarters, false communiques were sent through diplomatic backchannels, hinting that Patton was about to unleash his assault across the narrowest part of the channel. Every piece of the deception, every phantom signal, pointed to one inevitable conclusion: Calais was the real target. Meanwhile, deep inside Bletchley Park, Allied codebreakers listened in on German communications. Their Enigma decrypts confirmed what everyone had hoped: enemy divisions remained concentrated at Calais, their commanders awaiting orders that would never come. Hitler's paranoia sealed the deception's success. He was convinced that Normandy was merely the opening move of a larger trap. He refused to release the 15th Army from its positions. As the beaches of Normandy burned under artillery and machine gun fire, the ghosts of Fortitude stood guard across the channel, silent, invisible saviors of the men dying for the real invasion. By the end of June, German reconnaissance still reported large-scale activity at Dover. Dummy landing craft were repaired and repainted, fake camps were expanded, and Garbeau continued to feed reports suggesting an imminent assault. The Germans clung to the illusion long after it should have collapsed. Even as Allied tanks broke through at Caen and Saint-Lô, the 15th Army waited for orders that never came. Operation Fortitude had done more than deceive. It had paralyzed an enemy command structure built on fear, ego, and obsession. It was no longer just a lie, it was a mirror reflecting Hitler's own expectations back at him. June 6, 1944. For 15 hours. Normandy, France. The sky was a deep gray curtain, broken only by the flicker of anti-aircraft fire. Allied paratroopers drifted through the night, silhouettes against the clouds, their parachutes snapping in the wind. Below them, the Norman countryside burned with tracers and explosions. The invasion, the real one, had begun. And yet, 150 miles to the northeast, along the coast of Pas-de-Calais, the German 15th Army stood silent. Its tanks were fueled. Its infantry waited in bunkers and trenches, eyes fixed on the channel. They had orders to remain on alert, but not to move. The enemy wasn't coming to Normandy, they believed. He was coming here. Back at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, Hitler's staff gathered around the daily situation map. Telephones rang. Reports flooded in. Field Marshal Keitel read the latest dispatch: Allied landings confirmed near Caen, Bayeux, and Saint-Mire-Église. Hitler, still in his robe, frowned at the map. "This cannot be the main attack," he muttered. "It's a feint." The decisive blow will fall at Calais. His intelligence officers nodded. Every piece of data they had reinforced that assumption. Garbeau's latest message. The radio chatter from Dover. Reconnaissance photos of Patton's army. To Hitler, Normandy wasn't the invasion, it was the distraction. And so, as the beaches of Omaha and Juneau turned into killing grounds, as Allied troops clawed their way through barbed wire and artillery fire, Germany's strongest division sat idle, waiting for ghosts. In the command posts of the 15th Army, generals stared at their maps in frustration. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, aware that the front at Normandy was in danger of collapsing, begged for permission to send reinforcements south. But the order never came. Even as panzer divisions at Caen were overwhelmed, Hitler refused to move his reserves. "Wait," he ordered. "The real invasion will come at Calais." His conviction was total. The deception, woven from lies, illusions, and phantom soldiers, had infiltrated the very heart of German decision-making. Back in England, the men who had built the deception waited anxiously. At St. James's Square, Colonel Bevan's staff huddled around teletypes, intercepting fragments of German radio traffic. Each decoded message confirmed their wildest hope: the enemy still believed. Fortitude was working. At Dover, inflatable tanks still lined the fields. Dummy landing craft bobbed in the harbors. Radio operators sent fake transmissions around the clock. It was a theater that no audience would ever applaud, but whose success would decide the war. June 7, 1944. The second day of the Normandy landings dawned blood-red over the beaches. Allied troops, now dug in along the bluffs, awaited the inevitable counterattack. But it never came. In Paris, German commanders were still awaiting word from Berlin. One officer, General Hans Speidel, later recalled, "We waited for orders that did not arrive." The Führer believed the main landing was still to come. Every hour we lost was another step toward defeat. And hour by hour, those steps became irreversible. Inside Bletchley Park, the decryption teams confirmed the scale of the victory. Enigma traffic revealed that Hitler had personally instructed the 15th Army to remain in its positions until further notice. It would take more than 6 weeks, 6 critical, irreplaceable weeks, before the Germans began to realize the truth. By then, it was far too late. While the beaches at Normandy grew into fortified Allied strongholds, Operation Fortitude continued at full tempo. The deception couldn't stop, not yet. The illusion had to remain believable long enough to keep German reinforcements divided. Garbeau, ever the actor, continued to report imaginary updates from his network. He informed Berlin that the main invasion force at Calais had been delayed by weather but remained poised for action. The Germans responded with gratitude and promoted him yet again. Their final message to him read, "Your accuracy and reliability are beyond question. You are our most valuable source." And all the while, Allied divisions were pushing deeper into France. By late July, with the breakout from Saint-Lô underway and the Allies racing toward Paris, the truth could no longer be denied. The Germans finally realized the invasion at Calais would never come. But by then, the deception had done its work. The 15th Army, over 20 divisions strong, had been pinned down for more than a month, unable to act. That paralysis had given the Allies the foothold they needed to liberate France. When General Patton finally did cross into France with his real army, the Germans scarcely knew what to believe anymore. Inside Bletchley Park, the decryption teams confirmed the scale of the victory. Enigma traffic revealed that Hitler had personally instructed the 15th Army to remain in its positions until further notice. It would take more than 6 weeks, 6 critical, irreplaceable weeks, before the Germans began to realize the truth. By then, it was far too late. While the beaches at Normandy grew into fortified Allied strongholds, Operation Fortitude continued at full tempo. The deception couldn't stop, not yet. The illusion had to remain believable long enough to keep German reinforcements divided. Garbo, ever the actor, continued to report imaginary updates from his network. He informed Berlin that the main invasion force at Calais had been delayed by weather but remained poised for action. The Germans responded with gratitude and promoted him yet again. Their final message to him read: "Your accuracy and reliability are beyond question. You are our most valuable source." And all the while, Allied divisions were pushing deeper into France. By late July, with the breakout from Saint-Lô underway and the Allies racing toward Paris, the truth could no longer be denied. The Germans finally realized the invasion at Calais would never come. But by then, the deception had done its work. The 15th Army, over 20 divisions strong, had been pinned down for more than a month, unable to act. That paralysis had given the Allies the foothold they needed to liberate France. When General Patton finally did cross into France with his real army, the Germans scarcely knew what to believe anymore. After the war, as Allied intelligence files were declassified, the full extent of Operation Fortitude came to light. Historians were astonished by how comprehensively it had fooled the Third Reich. Every layer, the double agents, the fake radio traffic, the inflatable tanks, the phantom airfields, had reinforced a single, believable story. It wasn't luck. It was design. Deception had become an art form orchestrated by men who understood not just warfare, but human psychology. When the Allied Supreme Commander, Dwight D. Eisenhower, reviewed the final reports of Fortitude, he wrote a simple line in the margin. The success of Overlord owed much to this ghost army. Without it, the beaches might have run red in vain. Operation Fortitude had been, in every sense, invisible, but decisive. As the months passed, the ghost army was quietly dismantled. Inflatable tanks were deflated and stacked in warehouses. Dummy landing craft were towed away and scrapped. The actors of Fortitude, radio men, agents, and illusionists, returned to anonymity. But in the archives of military history, the truth remained. A war won not only by courage and firepower, but by imagination and deception. The lie that saved D-Day. The shadow army that never existed. And yet, changed the fate of the world.